The air in the precinct buzzed with a low, constant hum of activity. Fluorescent lights, harsh and unwavering, cast long shadows across the linoleum tiles as Detective Miles Corbin walked through the bullpen. Each step echoed faintly, a solitary beat against the symphony of ringing phones and hushed conversations. He nodded at Officer Miller, a young patrolman who still held a flicker of idealism in his eyes, a look Miles hadn't seen in his own reflection for years. Officer Miller offered a respectful, "Morning, Detective." Miles managed a curt nod in return, his gaze sweeping over the familiar faces. They were his colleagues, his brothers and sisters in blue. But the camaraderie he once felt was now a distant memory, fractured by the events of the past few weeks. He reached his desk, a small island in the sea of cubicles, a stack of case files, a chipped coffee mug, and a framed photo of his younger brother Ethan sat neatly arranged. Ethan, the name itself was a physical ache, a constant reminder of what had been lost. The official report called it a botched robbery, a tragic accident. But Miles knew better. Ethan, his bright, optimistic brother, wouldn't have been in that part of town, in that situation, not unless someone had put him there. He sank into his worn office chair, the familiar squeak a small comfort. The scent of stale coffee and recycled air filled his nostrils. He picked up Ethan's photo, tracing the smile that used to light up every room. The ache intensified. He wasn't just looking for answers anymore. He was embarking on a war against the shadows that had swallowed his brother whole. He had to find the truth, no matter how ugly it was, no matter who it implicated within the very walls he now stood. He opened the first file, the official report of Ethan's death, the sterile language a stark contrast to the raw grief that churned within him. He was a detective, trained to observe, to analyze, to piece together puzzles, but this wasn't just a case. It was personal. The details of the report were infuriatingly vague, a carefully constructed narrative designed to be accepted, not questioned. A convenience store on the wrong side of Riverside, a struggle, a single gunshot. The responding officers were listed, their statements clipped and procedural. Miles knew most of them. He'd shared meals with some, trained with others. Could any of them be involved? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He meticulously reread each officer's statement, searching for inconsistencies, for the smallest crack in the facade of normalcy. It felt like sifting through ashes, hoping to find a spark of betrayal. He remembered Ethan's last phone call, a hurried, almost panicked conversation about a big delivery and needing to clear his name. What delivery? What did he need to clear his name from? These were questions the report conveniently ignored. The district attorney's office had already closed the case, deeming it a straightforward, albeit heartbreaking incident. But Miles's gut, the same instinct that had served him well in countless investigations, screamed that something was terribly wrong. Something was being hidden. He leaned back in his chair, the springs protesting. He needed to unravel this, thread by careful thread. He needed to earn their trust, become one of them, while simultaneously dissecting their every move. He pulled out a fresh notebook, its pages crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the cynicism that had begun to cloud his own. He wrote Ethan's name at the top of the first page. Beneath it, he began to jot down the names of the officers who had been on duty that night. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he had to start somewhere. The silence of his desk felt immense, a stark isolation amidst the bustling precinct. He was alone in this, a hunter in a den of potential predators. He glanced again at Ethan's photograph, His brother deserved justice, not a sealed file and a hasty burial. Miles closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Ethan's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was truly happy. That happy memory was now a weapon, fueling a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about procedure or protocol anymore. This was about vengeance. He opened his eyes, a grim determination settling on his features. The first step was to play the part, to be the grieving brother, the diligent detective. But beneath that mask, a different man was beginning to emerge, a man who would stop at nothing. The investigation had just begun, but the war had already started. He knew, with chilling certainty, that this path would lead him into the darkest corners of the department, and he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to come back. He opened a notepad and began to meticulously document every detail, every whisper of doubt. He needed to be methodical, unseen, a lone wolf, even within the pack. He started with the patrol logs from the night Ethan died, cross-referencing names, times, and locations. Each entry was a potential breadcrumb, a tiny piece of information that might lead him closer to the truth. A specific patrol car, an unusual detour, a discrepancy in mileage. The minutiae of police work, often overlooked, now held the weight of his brother's life. He spent hours poring over the documents, the recycled office air growing thick with the dim light of his desk lamp. The faces of his colleagues blurred in his mind, morphing from trusted partners into potential adversaries. He saw suspicion in their casual glances, heard accusation in their friendly banter. Paranoia, he told himself. Just paranoia born of grief. But deep down he knew it was more than that. He was being watched. He felt it. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about the rot that had set in, the corruption that festered beneath the badge, and he was about to expose it all. He saved the notebook in his desk drawer, a secret weapon for a secret war. Tonight, he would start digging deeper, beyond the official reports, into the underbelly of the city that had claimed his brother. And real quick before we move on, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories just like this. Now, let's keep going. The city of Port Angeles, Washington, felt a breath away from perpetual autumn. Mist clung to the Olympic Mountains, softening their jagged peaks, and the air carried the damp scent of pine and salt from the Puget Sound. Miles Corbin drove his nondescript sedan, a vehicle chosen for its anonymity, along the winding roads that led away from the city's core. He was heading towards the outskirts, towards the docks, a place where shadows stretched long and truths were often found buried beneath nets and rust. He needed to speak to someone who wasn't wearing a badge, someone who operated in the same murky world Ethan had apparently stumbled into. His contact, a dock worker named Silas, was a man who had seen too much and said too little for too long. Silas owed Miles a favor, a significant one from years back, and Miles was now calling it in. He pulled up to a sparsely lit bar called The Salty Dog, its neon sign flickering like a dying ember. The kind of place where conversations were best held in hushed tones, away from prying ears. He parked a block away, a habit ingrained from years of surveillance. Trust no one, see everything. The mantra echoed in his mind. He entered The Salty Dog, the air thick with the smell of cheap beer and desperation. A few gruff-looking men nursed their drinks at the bar, their eyes flicking towards him with a practiced indifference. Miles scanned the room, his gaze settling on a booth in the far corner, bathed in an even deeper gloom. Silas sat there, a silhouette against the dim light. A half-empty glass of amber liquid in front of him. Miles slid into the booth opposite Silas, the worn vinyl creaking under his weight. "Silas," Miles said, his voice low. Silas looked up, his face a roadmap of hard living, a network of weathered lines around his eyes. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Corbin," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Haven't seen you around these parts in a while." Miles didn't waste time. "I need information about Ethan Bellwether." He watched Silas's reaction closely, searching for any flicker of recognition or unease. Silas's hand, resting on the table, tightened slightly around his glass. "The kid," Silas murmured, his gaze dropping to his drink. "Yeah, I heard. Bad business." "It was," Miles confirmed. "They're saying it was a robbery gone wrong. I don't buy it. Ethan was in deep, wasn't he? Involved in something he shouldn't have been." Miles kept his tone even, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather, but his eyes were sharp, dissecting every subtle shift in Silas's demeanor. This was Miles's advantage. He knew how to read people, how to peel back the layers of their defenses. Silas swirled the liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly. "Deep is putting it lightly, Corbin." He was swimming with sharks. He paused, taking a slow sip. He got caught between two tides. Local crew and some outsiders moving product through here. Big operation. Ethan was trying to leverage something. Play both sides, maybe. Big mistake. The words came out slowly, carefully chosen. What had Ethan been trying to leverage? And who were these outsiders? Miles leaned forward. Did Ethan mention names? Anyone in particular he was dealing with? He avoided mentioning his brother's name directly with Silas. It felt like a betrayal to debase Ethan's memory with these sordid dealings. He needed to know the players, the ones Ethan had crossed. Silas met his gaze, a hint of warning in his tired eyes. "You're walking into a hornet's nest, Corbin. This isn't some petty street crime. These are professionals, organized. They don't leave loose ends." He gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the unseen machinations of the city's underbelly. Ethan, he was too smart for his own good, but he lacked the ruthlessness. He thought he could handle it. He was wrong. This confirmed Miles's suspicions. Ethan hadn't been a victim of random violence. He'd been deliberately targeted. Miles's jaw tightened. Ruthlessness is something I'm learning. Did he have a contact? Someone he was meeting? Someone you saw him with? He needed a name, a face, a starting point beyond the abstract outsiders. He pushed the question, chipping away at Silas's reticence. Silas hesitated, the silence stretching, taut with unspoken knowledge. He fiddled with a coaster, his fingers tracing its damp edge. There was a meet, last week, maybe two, down by Pier 7. A sleek black car, tinted windows. Ethan got out, met with a guy, tall, sharp dresser, expensive suit. Didn't see his face clear, but he had this presence, like coiled danger. The description was hazy, deliberately so probably. But a sleek black car, a tailored suit, this wasn't the usual street thug. This was someone with influence, someone with connections. Did you hear any names? Miles pressed, the image of the man, faceless but menacing, beginning to form in his mind. Anything at all? Silas shook his head slowly. No names. But you seen that car around? It ain't local. And the guy, something about him, made my skin crawl. Ethan looked nervous as hell. He left with that guy's attention fixed on him, like a predator on prey. The image solidified. Ethan, trapped, observed. Silas clammed up immediately after that. He'd said enough, too much perhaps. He pushed his glass away. That's all I got, Corbin. You push too hard, you're going to end up like your brother. Miles absorbed the warning, the chill in Silas's voice, a grim testament to its truth. A predator. A sleek black car. This was the trail, faint but undeniable. He slid a rolled-up bill across the table. "Thanks, Silas, for everything." He didn't need Silas to like him, only to talk. As Miles stood to leave, Silas spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "Be careful, Corbin. The people Ethan tangled with, they're not the kind you can arrest. They're the kind you have to dissect, piece by piece." Miles left the salty dog, the night air biting at his skin, the scent of the Puget Sound doing little to wash away the metallic tang of danger that now clung to him. He had a lead, a vague description, and a chilling warning. The game had just escalated. Riverside, the district in Port Angeles that whispered of faded glory and forgotten dreams, was where Miles's investigation had to go next. It was gritty, a place where the neon signs of late-night diners fought a losing battle against the encroaching darkness, and the streets often felt too quiet. This was where Ethan had been found, a crumpled heap behind a corner store named Quick Stop. The store itself had been ransacked, its broken windows and scattered shelves a testament to the violence. Miles had been to the scene countless times since Ethan's death, but today he approached it with a different eye, not just as a grieving brother, but as a predator himself, studying the prey's last known location. He parked his car a few blocks away, as always, letting the anonymity of the streets swallow him. The Quick Stop was newly boarded up, a dark, gaping maw. The police tape had long since been removed, but the scars of the incident remained, etched into the building's facade. Miles walked towards it, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was cool, carrying the faint aroma of decaying leaves and distant exhaust fumes. He circled the building, his gaze sharp, taking in every detail the uniformed officers might have missed or deemed unimportant. The alleyway behind the store, stained with old grease and refuse, was where the worst of the struggle had apparently taken place. He found a loose board in the back door, a subtle indication that someone had been in or out since the initial police sweep. He wedged his fingers into the gap, the wood splintering under his determined pressure. With a groan, the board gave way, allowing him access. He slipped inside, the darkness immediate and absolute. The smell within was a potent mix of dust, mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly coppery. Blood. Even after all this time, the scent lingered like a ghost. He pulled out a small, powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. He moved cautiously, mapping the interior with his beam. Shelves lay toppled, their contents spilled across the floor in a chaotic mess. The cash register was smashed open, its emptiness a testament to the robbery. But Miles wasn't interested in the stolen goods. He was looking for the incongruities, the clues that pointed to something beyond a simple crime of opportunity. He shone his light on the floor near the back wall, where the chalk outline of Ethan's body had once been. The concrete was scuffed and scratched, evidence of a violent struggle. He knelt, running his gloved fingers over the rough surface. He found a small, glinting object lodged in a crack. He carefully retrieved it, placing it in a small evidence bag he'd brought with him. It looked like a cufflink, intricately engraved with a crest he didn't recognize. This was tangible. This was something. The official report had mentioned nothing of the killer's attire, nothing that would leave behind such a personal artifact. He continued his search, his flashlight beam dancing across the debris. He found what looked like a faint scuff mark on the wall, higher than a normal person would reach in a struggle on the floor. It suggested someone had been pushed against the wall, hard, and then he noticed it. Tucked beneath a toppled display of candy bars, almost entirely obscured, was a torn piece of fabric. It was a dark, rich material, the kind you wouldn't find on a common thief. He bagged the fragment, his pulse quickening. This fabric, combined with the cufflink, painted a different picture than the one presented by the authorities. He spent another hour meticulously cataloging every detail, taking discrete photos with his phone. He was building his own evidence, reconstructing the scene brick by brick, clue by clue. He noted the type of damage to the store, the location of the fallen shelves, the angle of the scuff marks. He wanted to understand the sequence of events, to see if the official narrative held up under scrutiny. It didn't, not even close. As he was about to leave, he noticed something on the wall near the broken window, almost invisible in the dim light. It was a faint serial number, etched into the metal frame. He photographed it carefully. It looked like it belonged to the security camera system, but the cameras themselves were gone, likely stolen along with the cash. Whoever had done this was thorough, but not thorough enough. He had missed this etching, this silent witness. Leaving the quick stop, Miles felt a grim satisfaction. He had found what he was looking for, not just evidence, but confirmation that his suspicions were valid. The killer was not a random thug. Ethan had been targeted, and the person responsible was someone who dressed well, wore expensive cufflinks, and clearly had a motive beyond simple robbery. Someone who had access to the store's security system, or had the means to remove it. This wasn't just a murder, it was an execution. He drove back towards the precinct, the cufflink and fabric fragment tucked safely away. He knew he couldn't present this evidence officially, not yet. He needed to connect it to someone, to a name. He needed to play his role at the precinct, to be the grieving detective, while secretly gathering the evidence that would bring Ethan's killer to justice. The knowledge that Ethan had likely met his end trying to expose something or leverage something fueled his resolve. He was no longer just investigating. He was compiling a hit list, and he was about to start crossing names off it, starting with the faint etching on the wall. The city of Port Angeles, cloaked in mist, held its secrets close, but Miles Corbin was determined to pry them open, one brutal truth at a time. Back at the Port Angeles Police Department, the fluorescent lights of the bullpen seemed to mock Miles with their sterile normalcy. The air buzzed with the usual symphony of phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the low murmur of police jargon. He walked in, a ghost in his own workplace, his mind still replaying the grim details of the quick stop. He nodded to Officer Davies, who was hunched over a steaming cup of coffee, and received a tired, "Rough night, detective?" in return. Miles managed a weak smile, the lie coming easily now. He settled into his cubicle, the framed photo of Ethan his only anchor to the man he used to be. He pulled out the evidence bag containing the cufflink and the fabric fragment. He knew he couldn't log this officially. Not yet. This was his personal arsenal. He needed to identify the crest on the cufflink, find out who wore such expensive attire, and where Ethan might have encountered them. He pulled up his personal laptop, a machine he kept separate from the department's network, a digital ghost in the machine. His fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for common heraldry, luxury brands, anything that matched the intricate design. He cross-referenced the fabric with high-end tailors and designers. While his personal machine crunched through potential matches, Miles turned his attention to the department's internal systems. He needed information, and the precinct's network, despite his paranoia, was still the most comprehensive source. He accessed the security footage request logs. The quick stop incident, filed under robbery homicide, had been a priority. He scrolled through the requests, noting the officers who had signed out surveillance footage from the surrounding area on the night of Ethan's murder. His eyes narrowed as he saw a name appear multiple times. Detective Sergeant Thorne. Thorne was a veteran, respected, by the book, or so Miles had thought. Thorne had signed out footage from cameras covering the main routes leading to and from the quick stop, as well as several others closer to the docks. Why would a detective on a robbery case need so much footage from areas far from the crime scene? Unless he was looking for something specific. Someone specific. Thorne was usually partnered with Detective Ramirez, a younger officer Miles hadn't worked with much, but who seemed diligently by the book. Miles opened another log, this one detailing evidence collection. The Quick Stop report listed minimal recovered evidence, a few loose shell casings, the store's damaged signage, and a few fingerprints that ultimately led nowhere. Nothing about a cufflink, nothing about expensive fabric. The report was pristine, almost too clean. He suspected Thorne had seen Ethan's killer, or at least the vehicle, and had made the evidence disappear. He also noticed something else. A minor anomaly in the dispatch logs for that night. A patrol car, driven by Officer Miller, the young, idealistic officer he'd seen earlier, had been rerouted to assist with a supposed welfare check a few blocks away from the quick stop, right at the time Ethan was believed to have been killed. A welfare check that seemed to have originated from Thorne's direct radio call. Miles felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Thorne was orchestrating this. He discreetly pulled up Thorne's personnel file. Clean record, numerous commendations. Married, 2 kids. On the surface, impeccable. But Miles knew that beneath polished exteriors, corruption often hid. He recalled a conversation he'd once overheard Thorne having, something about handling problems discreetly. He'd dismissed it at the time as typical precinct talk, but now it felt sinister. His personal laptop pinged. A match. The crest on the cufflink, a stylized griffin intertwined with a serpent, was the insignia of the Blackwell Corporation, a powerful, privately held multinational with rumored ties to organized crime, particularly in shipping and logistics. And the fabric fragment? A high thread count silk blend, commonly used in custom-tailored suits by an exclusive Savile Row tailor that catered to an elite clientele. This wasn't just a random killer. This was someone with significant power and resources. Someone linked to the outsiders Silas had mentioned. Miles leaned back, the pieces beginning to assemble into a horrifying picture. Thorne, a detective within the department, was covering for the Blackwell Corporation, or someone associated with it, and he'd used Officer Miller, likely unknowingly, to ensure no witnesses saw anything. Ethan must have stumbled upon something involving this corporation, something they couldn't afford to have exposed. His brother had been trying to play a dangerous game, and Thorne had ensured he lost. He saved the images of the cufflink crest and the fabric to his secure drive. He felt a surge of cold fury. He was no longer just investigating a murder. He was exposing a conspiracy that reached from dockside dealings to the highest levels of the department. The grief was still there, a raw wound, but it was now overshadowed by a burning desire for retribution. He looked at Ethan's photo again. His expression hardened. He knew what he had to do. He had to get closer to Thorne, to observe him, to find more proof. He had to earn Thorne's trust, to become the loyal subordinate who could get close enough to strike. The hunter was becoming the hunted, but he was also becoming something far more dangerous. The following days were a carefully orchestrated pantomime. Miles Corbin played the part of the grieving detective, attending to his duties with a muted efficiency that hinted at a deep melancholy. He'd offer vague, wistful comments about Ethan to colleagues who approached him, letting the sorrow hang in the air. a palpable weight. But beneath the surface of his quiet facade, his mind was a relentless engine, analyzing every interaction, every overheard conversation, every patrol car's route. He needed to get closer to Thorn, to become a fly on the wall of his corrupt world, as Silas had indirectly advised. He started by offering his assistance on Thorn's current cases. "Sergeant," he'd say, his voice tinged with a practiced earnestness, "I've been looking at the Riverside distribution warehouse thefts. Seems like the same MO as some of the dockyard stuff we've seen. Perhaps I could lend a hand with the surveillance." Thorn, usually guarded, seemed to appreciate the offer, perhaps misinterpreting Miles's eagerness as professional ambition, or perhaps, as Miles suspected, a sign of someone looking to fall in line. Thorn had a gruff, no-nonsense demeanor, and Miles found himself adapting to it, mirroring Thorn's clipped speech and direct questioning. They worked on a few low-level busts together, Miles observing Thorn's methods, his interactions with informants, his subtle directives to uniformed officers. He noticed Thorn's almost uncanny ability to anticipate criminal movements, a skill that now struck Miles as less intuition and more precognition, likely gleaned from privileged information or paid informants. One evening, Thorn was reviewing surveillance footage from a shipment that had arrived at the Port Angeles docks. Miles was present, supposedly offering his input, but his eyes were scanning Thorn's posture, his subtle reactions. Thorn pointed to a particular delivery truck on the grainy black and white footage. "This one," Thorn grunted, his voice low. "Something about that driver. Keep an eye on him." Miles's heart pounded. The truck was similar to the one Silas had described, a dark, nondescript vehicle that blended into the industrial backdrop. This was it, the tangible link to the Blackwell Corporation. Miles casually remarked, "He looks like just another tired trucker, Sergeant. You think he's involved?" Thorn's eyes, sharp and assessing, met Miles's. "Sometimes, Corbin," Thorn said, his voice a low growl. "The most dangerous men are the ones who look like they're not even in the game." It was a test, Miles realized. Thorn was probing, seeing if Miles would accept his lead without question. Miles nodded, feigning acceptance. "Right. I understand. I'll put a team on him, discreetly." He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with dread. He was playing with fire, walking a tightrope over an abyss. He knew Thorn was watching him, evaluating him, trying to gauge his loyalty or his potential threat. Every word, every gesture Miles made was being scrutinized. Later that week, Thorn brought Miles into a more sensitive discussion about a rival criminal element that had been muscling in on territory typically controlled by a known drug cartel. Thorn was outlining a plan to disrupt their operations, a plan that involved providing discreet, albeit unofficial, tips to a particularly violent faction of that cartel. "We let them weaken each other, Corbin," Thorn explained, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculated logic. "It's cleaner that way, less paperwork." Miles listened, a knot of revulsion and grim admiration forming in his gut. Thorn wasn't just corrupt, he was a strategist, a manipulator of criminal underworlds. He was turning the city's own predators against each other, using the badge as a mask for his machinations. This aligned perfectly with Silas's description of Ethan being caught between two tides. Thorn was feeding information to the outsiders while profiting from the chaos. He found himself wondering about Officer Miller. Had Thorn manipulated him into rerouting his patrol car that night with another fabricated welfare check? It was a disturbing thought. The innocence of that young officer was being systematically corrupted. Miles knew he had to be careful. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and Thorn would see through his act, and Miles would suffer the same fate as Ethan. He began to build his own network, Not of informants in the traditional sense, but of loose threads, people who owed him favors, people who had also been wronged by Thorne or his associates. He discreetly gathered information on Thorne's movements, his known associates, his financial records. He planted seeds of doubt, anonymous tips about Thorne's unusual interest in certain shipments, subtle questions about his access to restricted information. He was using Thorne's own tactics against him, turning the department's internal channels into his own investigative tools. The pieces were falling into place, but they were sharp, dangerous fragments. The cufflink, the fabric, the truck, Thorne's manipulation of criminal factions, the potential involvement of the Blackwell Corporation. It all pointed to a deeply entrenched network of corruption. Miles knew he was getting close, but he also knew that Thorne was the gatekeeper to the man who had ordered Ethan's murder, and Thorne was dangerous. The question was no longer if Thorne was involved, but how deep, and how to get to him without getting himself killed. The dance was becoming more intricate, the stakes higher, and the shadows deeper. He had to be impeccable. The rain began as a soft patter against the precinct windows, a melancholic accompaniment to the late-night shift. Miles Corbin sat at his desk, the framed photo of his brother, a silent, accusing presence. He'd spent the day on edge, Thorne's subtle questioning leaving him feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Thorne had brought him coffee, a gesture of camaraderie that felt laced with suspicion. "Tough case tonight, Corbin, but we'll crack it. We always do." Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. Miles had feigned exhaustion, the carefully crafted persona of a man weighed down by grief and duty. He knew Thorne suspected something, or perhaps he was merely testing the waters to see how pliable Miles was. Whatever the intent, Miles had to push. He couldn't afford to wait for Thorne to make the first move. The time for passive investigation was over. It was time to cross the threshold from detective to something far more visceral. He'd received an anonymous tip through one of his carefully cultivated loose threads, a low-level informant who owed him a significant debt. The tip was about a clandestine meeting scheduled for that night, involving Thorne and an unknown party at an abandoned shipyard down by the old cannery district. The informant described it as a transfer of goods, something more significant than just stolen merchandise. Miles knew this was his chance, a chance to catch Thorne in the act, to glean concrete proof of his illicit dealings, and maybe, just maybe, to get a glimpse of the true players involved. He didn't report it. Protocol dictated he inform his superior, but his superior was Thorne. He slipped the informant's encrypted message into his personal drive. He knew surveillance would be too risky with Thorne actively watching him. He couldn't risk another patrol car being mysteriously rerouted, another piece of evidence vanishing from the scene. This had to be personal. He left the precinct under the guise of needing fresh air, the rain now a torrential downpour, turning the streets into slick, black ribbons. He drove his nondescript sedan, blending into the shadows of the rain-swept city. The old cannery district was a decaying skeleton of Port Angelus's industrial past, a labyrinth of crumbling warehouses and rusting machinery, silent and forgotten. The air was thick with the smell of brine and decay, a fitting backdrop for the clandestine dealings Miles suspected were taking place. He parked a good distance away, near a derelict fishing trawler, its hull barnacle-encrusted and listing precariously. The rain hammered down, a deafening roar that cloaked any sounds he might make. He moved on foot, his senses on high alert, his service weapon secured in a concealed holster beneath his jacket. His eyes scanned the area, his flashlight beam cutting through the downpour, illuminating waterlogged crates and skeletal remains of industrial equipment. He wasn't just a detective anymore. He was a ghost, a hunter in the storm. He found a vantage point on the second story of a collapsed warehouse, overlooking the main loading bay where the meeting was supposed to occur. The space was vast, echoing, and eerily empty save for a single floodlit dock. And then he saw it. A sleek black car, its polished surface mirroring the rain-swept concrete, pulled into the bay. It was the same make, the same imposing presence Silas had described, and emerging from the driver's side was a figure in an expensive, tailored suit, the silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. This had to be a representative from the Blackwell Corporation. Minutes later, Thorne arrived, his own unmarked department vehicle pulling up discreetly behind the black car. Miles's breath hitched. He saw Thorne exit his vehicle and approach the other man. Their conversation was inaudible over the storm, but the body language spoke volumes. It was a transaction, a furtive exchange. Miles strained his eyes, trying to catch even a glimpse of what was being handed over. It looked like a briefcase, standard, but the implications, the scale of this operation, were anything but. Suddenly, another vehicle roared into the bay, a souped-up muscle car that kicked up a spray of water. 3 men spilled out, armed and aggressive. They weren't part of the meeting. They were an ambush. Miles recognized one of them, a known enforcer for a local cartel, the same cartel Thorne had been manipulating. It was a trap. Thorne had set them up to be ambushed, but why? To eliminate the competition, or to silence them after the Blackwell deal was done? Chaos erupted, gunfire split the night, sharp cracks that were swallowed by the storm. Miles ducked instinctively, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw Thorne shove the man in the suit behind the black car, a primal instinct for self-preservation. The cartel members were firing wildly, their bullets ricocheting off metal and concrete. Miles knew he couldn't just watch. His investigation had led him here, to the heart of the rot. He couldn't let it end with Thorne escaping, or with innocent lives caught in the crossfire. This was no longer about gathering evidence for a court of law. This was about ensuring Ethan's killer, and those who protected them, paid. Drawing his firearm, Miles moved from his perch. He had to intervene. He had to bring his own brand of justice to this rain-soaked battlefield. He was no longer just a detective. He was the storm. The hunt had just turned violent. The storm raged, both outside and within the abandoned shipyard. The crackle of gunfire echoed through the skeletal structures, a brutal percussion against the drumming rain. Miles Corbin, his service weapon drawn, moved with a predatory grace through the shadows, the objective no longer just to observe, but to intercept. The cartel members, their faces contorted with aggression, were advancing. The man in the suit and Thorne were attempting to disengage. One of the cartel thugs, a burly man with a shaved head, spotted Miles emerging from the warehouse. His eyes widened for a split second before a guttural roar escaped his lips. He swung his automatic rifle towards Miles. Miles fired first, a controlled burst from his sidearm. The cartel member staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his weapon clattering to the ground. Miles didn't pause. He saw Thorne and the suited man scrambling towards the black car. The driver was already in position, engine running, a silent testament to their preparedness. Miles knew he had to stop them from escaping. He sprinted across the open space, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his tactical vest offering minimal protection against the onslaught. Another cartel member charged at him, a wicked-looking combat knife glinting in his hand. Miles met him head-on. He parried the man's wild slash with his forearm, pain shooting up his arm, and then, with a brutal efficiency born of necessity, he rammed the butt of his handgun into the man's jaw. The thug crumpled to the ground, momentarily stunned. Thorne and the suited man were already inside the black car, the engine revving. The driver, a grim-faced individual with cold eyes, slammed the gearshift into reverse. Miles knew he had one chance. He raised his weapon, aiming for the tires. He fired twice. The sound was a sharp retort, distinct even over the clamor of the storm and the ongoing gunfire with the remaining cartel members. The black car lurched, its rear tires deflating. It skidded, then ground to a halt. The driver cursed, trying to regain control, but the car was dead weight. Thorne leaned out the window, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He saw Miles, his eyes narrowed in recognition and sheer hatred. "Corbin, you son of a bitch!" Thorne's voice was lost in the wind. The remaining cartel enforcers, seeing their escape route cut off, turned their attention back to Thorne and the suited man. They were cornered, but Thorne, despite his predicament, wasn't backing down. He drew his own weapon, a Glock, and began firing back, his shots precise and deadly. This was Thorne's element, the brutal, violent negotiation he was so adept at. Miles knew this wasn't his fight to finish in the traditional sense. His objective was to expose and dismantle the network. The cartel was a pawn, a tool Thorne had used, but at this moment, they were also Thorne's immediate problem. He couldn't let Thorne escape, nor could he let the cartel eliminate Thorne and the evidence he possessed. He saw the Blackwell Corporation representative, the man in the suit, looking panicked. He fumbled with something in his briefcase. Miles's mind raced. Was it the goods Thorne had arranged to transfer? Was it incriminating evidence? He couldn't let it disappear. With a renewed burst of speed, Miles closed the distance. He tackled the suited man as he tried to bolt from the car. They both tumbled to the ground, entangled in a desperate struggle. The suited man was strong, surprisingly so, but Miles had the ferocity of a man fighting for his brother's memory. He landed a heavy blow to the man's temple and the man went limp. Miles grabbed the briefcase. It felt heavy, dense. He didn't have time to open it. More gunfire erupted nearby. Thorne was holding his own against the cartel, but the odds were stacked against him. Miles knew he had to disappear. He had created enough chaos, enough disruption. He had stopped the transfer, neutralized one of the key players, and forced Thorne into a corner. He looked back at Thorne, who was now engaged in a brutal close-quarters gunfight with the cartel enforcer he'd wounded earlier, the one with the shoulder injury. Thorne was fighting with a desperate ferocity, but he was outnumbered. Miles knew he couldn't save Thorne, and he didn't want to. Thorne was part of the rot, but he had one more job to do. He glanced at the black car, at the briefcase. He needed proof. He needed to show the department, the city, the true extent of the corruption. He quickly retrieved the cufflink again, the one he'd found at the quick stop, and placed it next to the briefcase, a deliberate, symbolic act. Then, as sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, Miles Corbin melted back into the driving rain, leaving behind a scene of bloody chaos. He had disrupted the operation, exposed a faction of the corruption, and acquired evidence, but Thorne was still alive, and the Blackwell Corporation remained a shadowy threat. The war was far from over. It had just become much bloodier. He had crossed a line, irrevocably committing himself to the path of vengeance. The flashing blue and red lights painted the dilapidated shipyard in a strobe-like frenzy as Miles Corbin drove away, the rain finally beginning to subside. He kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the distant chaos recede. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder before being abruptly cut off as he turned onto a less traveled road. He had succeeded in his objective: chaos, disruption, and evidence. But the victory was hollow, laced with the chilling realization of what he had become. He had entered the fray not as a detective, but as a combatant. In the passenger seat, the heavy briefcase sat ominously, a tangible symbol of the darkness he was uncovering. He had taken it from the downed Blackwell representative. He hadn't had time to examine its contents amidst the gunfire, but he knew it held answers, perhaps even the key to finding Ethan's killer. Beside it, gleaming faintly in the dim interior light, was the expensive cufflink he'd recovered from the quick stop, a grim reminder of the personal vendetta unfolding. He drove towards an abandoned warehouse he'd secured weeks ago, a pre-planned safe house on the industrial outskirts of Port Angeles. This was his new reality, operating outside the law, a phantom navigating the city's underbelly. He parked in a secluded alcove, the silence of the industrial zone, a stark contrast to the violent symphony he'd just left. He opened the briefcase. Inside, meticulously organized, were documents detailing shipping manifests, offshore accounts, and communication logs. Names and figures blurred on the pages, but one name appeared repeatedly, connected to high-value shipments and discreet acquisitions. Elias Vance, chairman of the Blackwell Corporation. Miles's gut clenched. Vance, the man pulling the strings. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling finality. The Blackwell Corporation was not merely involved in logistics, they were a front, a sophisticated operation using legitimate shipping channels to traffic contraband. And Ethan, his bright, naive brother, had stumbled upon their operation. Thorne was their inside man, their corrupt liaison within the PAPD, tasked with silencing anyone who got too close. The cufflink and the fabric fragment from the quickstop were Thorne's calling card, a subtle, arrogant signature of his involvement, likely shed during the struggle. He sifted through more documents, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, building rage. He found coded messages, references to loose ends, and cleaning house. It was all there. A damning indictment of the system and the men who operated within it. He then found a personal file, tucked away at the bottom, detailing Ethan's activities leading up to his death. It confirmed his worst fears. Ethan had been investigating a series of suspicious cargo discrepancies at the docks, trying to trace missing containers that were flagged as low value, but had reappeared elsewhere as high-value assets. He had gotten too close to Vance's operation. Miles leaned back, the harsh fluorescent light of the warehouse revealing the exhaustion etched on his face. He was no longer just looking for justice for Ethan. He was seeking retribution. Thorne had been exposed, his connection to the cartel and the Blackwell Corporation undeniable. But Thorne was merely a soldier. Vance was the general. Miles pulled out his phone, the one not connected to the department's network. He sent an anonymous tip to a trusted investigative journalist he knew, an old friend who owed him. The tip contained scanned copies of key documents from the briefcase and a brief, pointed message: investigate Elias Vance and the Blackwell Corporation. Look at the Port Angeles docks. Your brother's life may depend on it. He made sure to use a burner number. He then meticulously destroyed evidence that could link him to the shipyard incident. He wiped down the briefcase, then disposed of it in a remote industrial incinerator he knew of. He burned the fabric fragment and the cufflink, watching the flames consume them, a symbolic act of purging the old investigation and ushering in the new. The rain had stopped, but a new storm was brewing within Miles Corbin. He had stepped off the path of the law, and there was no turning back. He was a ghost, a hunter, and vengeance was his only creed. He knew Vance would be alerted, would retaliate. The next move would be his, and Miles would be ready. The investigation had ended. The hunt had truly begun. The aftermath of the shipyard skirmish hung heavy in the air at the Port Angeles Police Department. The news of an armed confrontation, attributed to a turf war between rival criminal factions, had spread like wildfire through the bullpen. Detective Sergeant Thorne was hailed as a hero, credited with single-handedly neutralizing the threat and apprehending one of the cartel members. Miles Corbin observed Thorne's triumphant return, playing the role of the impressed colleague, the man still reeling from his brother's death, but finding solace in the department's perceived victory. Thorne, however, seemed different. A new wariness had settled in his eyes, a subtle tension in his posture. He moved with a guardedness, as if constantly expecting an attack. Miles had anonymously fed the investigative journalist just enough information to ignite a firestorm. Whispers of Blackwell Corporation's involvement began to circulate, subtle leaks that forced the department's hand. Internal affairs, spurred by the journalist's increasingly pointed questions and the anonymous tip, initiated a quiet, discreet inquiry into Thorne's recent activities, particularly his involvement in the shipyard incident and the suspicious disappearance of evidence. Miles, however, knew this internal investigation was a charade. Thorne was too well connected. He would be protected. One afternoon, Thorne called Miles into his office. The room, usually a chaotic mess of case files, was unnervingly tidy. A single document lay on Thorne's desk, a satellite map with a large circle drawn around the abandoned warehouse Miles had used as his safe house. "Corbin," Thorne began, his voice devoid of its usual gruffness, replaced by a chillingly calm menace. "There was a disturbance at the old cannery last night. Bad business. A lot of gunfire." He paused, his gaze fixed on Miles. "We're told the perp got away, but we found something odd at the scene. A briefcase, empty, but with a rather distinctive cufflink left behind." Miles's blood ran cold. Thorne was onto him. Not fully, not yet, but he was connecting the dots. The cufflink. Miles had foolishly left it there symbolically, a taunt, a signature of his escalating vendetta. Now it was a direct link, a cufflink. "Sergeant, I was at home all night, mourning my brother." Miles kept his voice steady, his gaze unwavering, projecting an air of weary grief. He needed to gauge Thorne's level of certainty. Thorne leaned back, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Of course, Corbin. It's a rough time, but you know this cufflink, it's quite unique, belonged to a certain corporation, Blackwell Corporation. Interesting, isn't it?" He tapped the document on his desk. "And this warehouse, it's been flagged for suspicious activity. Unofficially, of course, just a hunch." Thorne's eyes bored into Miles. Funny how things connect, isn't it? The implication was clear. Thorne didn't have concrete proof, but he had suspicion, and that was enough for him to begin closing in. Miles realized his time playing the grieving detective was over. He couldn't afford to be observed being observed. He had to become the hunter he was pretending to be. "Sergeant," Miles said, his voice hardening, "if you believe I'm involved in criminal activity, then you have a duty to investigate. But my brother's death, it's all I care about. And if Thorne, or anyone else, is connected to it, they will pay." He let the implication hang in the air, a thinly veiled threat. Thorne's smile didn't falter, but it was no longer a gesture of misplaced camaraderie. It was a declaration of war. "We're all looking for justice, Corbin, just in different ways, perhaps." He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "Keep your head down, detective. This city has a way of swallowing people who go looking for trouble." As Miles left Thorne's office, he knew he had made Thorne's suspicions tangible. He had confirmed the target. Thorne would now actively work to uncover proof, and unlike Miles, Thorne had the department's resources at his disposal. He couldn't stay in Port Angeles. He couldn't afford to be apprehended, not with the Vance connection still tenuous and his own hands stained with more than just evidence. He returned to his cubicle, his movements deliberate, masking the urgency that now consumed him. He began to subtly erase his digital footprint within the PAPD network, deleting logs, shredding sensitive files that could be traced back to his personal searches, anything that could link him to his secret investigation. It was a race against time. He knew Thorne would soon be issuing warrants, searching for him. He had to disappear, to go underground, and continue his hunt from the shadows. He glanced at Ethan's photo one last time, a silent promise passing between them. He would not rest until Elias Vance paid for what he had done. The investigation had transformed into a full-blown manhunt, and Miles Corbin was now the quarry. But he was also the predator. He had stepped out of the precinct and into the wilderness, a lone wolf driven by a singular, all-consuming purpose: vengeance, delivered on his own terms. His life as Detective Miles Corbin was ending. His new one, as an executioner, was just beginning. Miles Corbin watched as Thorne's unmarked car pulled away from the precinct, a shadow disappearing into the twilight. He'd meticulously scrubbed his digital presence within the department's network, a ghost erasing its own tracks. His personal laptop, containing the bulk of his findings on Vance and the Blackwell Corporation, was already secured in a Faraday bag, ready for transport. He was a phantom now, a fugitive from the law he once upheld. The betrayal Thorne represented, the corruption that festered within the badge, was a bitter pill to swallow. He collected a few essential items from his locker: a change of clothes, a burner phone, a small cache of cash. His desk, with Ethan's beaming photo, remained untouched. A final, silent farewell to the life he was leaving behind. He stepped out of the precinct, not through the main entrance, but through a rear service door, a path he'd scouted for just such an occasion. The night air of Port Angeles, usually a familiar comfort, now felt alien, charged with threats he could no longer ignore. He drove his nondescript sedan towards the city limits, avoiding main thoroughfares, sticking to the forgotten back roads that wound through the coastal forests. The trees, ancient and imposing, seemed to watch him, silent sentinels of his lonely crusade. He drove for hours, the rhythmic hum of the engine a monotonous counterpoint to the cacophony of his thoughts. Every name, every piece of evidence, every betrayal flashed through his mind. Thorne was just a pawn. Elias Vance was the true target. His plan was not to flee, but to reposition, to operate from the periphery, a silent observer gathering strength. He had a lead, a discreet contact in Seattle, a former federal agent named Marcus Thorne, who had gone off-grid after a controversial case years ago. Marcus owed him a debt, a life-saving favor from a past op. Miles hoped Marcus would offer sanctuary, resources, and perhaps a new perspective on how to bring down a man like Vance. As dawn began to break over the rugged Washington coastline, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and nascent orange, Miles stopped at a remote diner off Highway 101. He ordered black coffee, his eyes constantly scanning the patrons, the road outside. Paranoia was no longer a choice. It was a survival mechanism. He felt the weight of Thorne's suspicion, the subtle tendrils of the Blackwell Corporation's influence reaching out. He knew they would be looking for him. He finally reached Seattle, a sprawling metropolis that felt both familiar and terrifying. He navigated the city's intricate network of streets, his burner phone pinging with a single, encrypted message from Marcus. The usual spot: Eastlake, midnight, come alone, trust no one. The usual spot: a dive bar on the northern edge of Lake Union, smelling of stale beer and regret, a place where secrets were traded and identities blurred. Miles arrived at the bar, the neon sign of the Rusty Anchor flickering erratically. He slipped inside, the dimly lit interior offering a welcome anonymity. He found Marcus in a secluded booth, a man etched with the same weariness Miles felt, but with an underlying intensity that spoke of a fighter. Marcus's eyes, sharp and intelligent, met Miles's, a flicker of recognition, then a grim nod. "Corbin," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "Been a while." Heard whispers. "Port Angeles PD, not pretty." He gestured for Miles to sit. "Trouble finds you, doesn't it?" "Trouble found Ethan," Miles replied, the raw pain still evident in his voice. "And now it's found me." He laid out the situation succinctly. Thorne's corruption, the Blackwell Corporation, Elias Vance, and his newfound fugitive status. Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable, but his focus unwavering. "Vance," Marcus finally said, the name a resonant echo in the quiet bar. "He's a ghost, elusive, has connections everywhere. Thorne was just a pawn, a useful tool to keep the local law enforcement blind. You've stirred a hornet's nest, Miles, a very big, very dangerous hornet's nest." He took a slow sip of his drink. "But I owe you, and I know how to hunt ghosts." An alliance was forged in the hushed confines of the bar. Two men on the run, united by loss and a shared thirst for justice on their own terms. The hunt for Vance had just moved to a new, more dangerous arena. The city of Seattle, a concrete jungle where shadows stretched long and secrets were woven into the fabric of its bustling arteries, became Miles Corbin's new hunting ground. He and Marcus Thorne had secured a small, discreet safe house in a nondescript apartment complex in the Ballard neighborhood, a place far from the surveillance networks he assumed Thorne and Vance's operatives would be scouring. The apartment was sparsely furnished, clean, and most importantly, untraceable. Miles felt a semblance of safety, a temporary reprieve from the constant threat of exposure. Marcus, a man who had navigated the underbelly of espionage and deep cover operations, began to mobilize his own network of contacts. These were not the compromised badges within the Port Angeles PD, but individuals who operated in the gray areas, former intelligence operatives, trusted freelance investigators, and information brokers who owed Marcus their allegiance or their lives. They began to gather intelligence on Elias Vance and the Blackwell Corporation, focusing on their operations in and around the Seattle metropolitan area, piecing together the extent of Vance's influence. "Vance operates through layers, Miles," Marcus explained, hunched over a holographic display in their safe house, projections of shipping routes and financial transactions flickering around him. "Blackwell Corp is just the tip of the iceberg. He's got shell companies, offshore accounts, and enforcers who make Thorne look like a schoolboy. He's shipping anything and everything through the port of Seattle. Arms, narcotics, even people. Ethan must have stumbled onto something big, something vital to Vance's empire." Miles watched the projections, the scope of Vance's empire dawning on him with a chilling clarity. Ethan hadn't just been investigating stolen containers, he had stumbled into a vast, international criminal enterprise. The realization fueled his rage, sharpening his resolve. This wasn't just about his brother anymore. It was about dismantling a cancer that infected cities and destroyed lives indiscriminately. Their first significant breakthrough came from a financial analyst Marcus employed, a woman operating under deep anonymity. She unearthed a series of suspicious money transfers from Blackwell Corporation's accounts to a private offshore entity controlled by Vance. These transfers coincided with the dates of several high-profile cargo seizures that had miraculously vanished from government impound lots. It's a sophisticated money laundering operation, intertwined with direct illicit trade, the analyst reported via encrypted audio. They're using laundered money to fund their operations and paying off everyone from dock workers to customs officials. Miles felt a surge of frustration. How do we get concrete proof, evidence that will stand up in court, or at least take Vance down by force? He knew that Vance's connections meant any traditional legal avenues would likely be obstructed. Marcus explained their strategy. Vance is arrogant. He's used to operating with impunity. He'll have a secure location, a nerve center where he conducts his most sensitive transactions. We need to find that, and when we do, we go in, not to arrest him, Miles, to eliminate him, to cut off the head of the snake. The ruthlessness in Marcus's voice was a mirror to Miles's own evolving mindset. The law had failed them. Justice, this time, would be delivered personally. Their focus shifted to identifying Vance's physical presence, his operational hubs. They traced his known associates, analyzed traffic patterns around his known properties, and cross-referenced shipping data with security camera footage from Seattle's port and industrial zones. It was a painstaking process, requiring meticulous attention to detail and an almost obsessive pursuit of anomalies. One evening, a breakthrough. Marcus's team flagged a series of unusually high-security shipments arriving at a private cargo terminal owned by a shell company linked to Vance, located on the southern outskirts of Seattle, close to Tacoma. The shipments were disguised as legitimate industrial equipment, but the frequency and secretive nature of their movements suggested something far more clandestine. Miles recognized the description from Silas's vague hints about the outsiders. Vance's operation was global, but its heart beat here in Washington. This terminal, Marcus stated, pointing to a section of a detailed aerial map. Its security protocols are off the charts. Private armed guards, biometric scanners, off-grid communication jammers. It screams sensitive operation, and it's too well protected for legitimate business. A plan began to form, a dangerous, high-stakes operation that would strike at the very center of Vance's empire. Miles felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the grim anticipation of enacting his vengeance. Seattle was no longer just a refuge. It was the battleground. The private cargo terminal, a sprawling complex of reinforced buildings and high-security fencing nestled near the industrial outskirts of Tacoma, was Elias Vance's fortress. Miles Corbin and Marcus Thorne surveyed it from a discreet vantage point on a nearby hill, the pre-dawn gloom cloaking their presence. The air was thick with the metallic tang of the port, a stark contrast to the cloying scent of pine from the surrounding forests. This was where Vance conducted his most clandestine operations, a hub for his illicit trafficking network. The intel suggests a major shipment is expected within the next 48 hours, Marcus whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. Arms, most likely, enough to destabilize a small nation, and Vance himself is expected to oversee the handover. He handed Miles a compact, high-powered rifle. This is where we make our move, Miles. No witnesses, no survivors. The pragmatism in Marcus's tone chilled Miles, but he knew it was necessary. The law was a weapon Vance had long since bypassed. Their plan was daring, bordering on suicidal. They would infiltrate the terminal during the expected shipment, using a combination of Marcus's specialized tech and Miles's tactical prowess. Their objective? Eliminate Vance, cripple the operation, and secure irrefutable evidence of Vance's crimes. The memory of Ethan's life, extinguished by Vance's greed, burned in Miles's mind, a constant fuel for his relentless pursuit. The infiltration began under the cover of darkness. Marcus, using sophisticated jammers and spoofing devices, created a temporary blind spot in the terminal's extensive security grid. Miles, moving with the silent precision of a predator, scaled a section of the perimeter fence, his grappling hook finding purchase on a steel beam. He dropped into the shadows, the damp earth muffling his landing. He moved through the labyrinthine complex, a ghost in the machine. Guards patrolled the grounds, heavily armed and vigilant, but Miles's training allowed him to anticipate their routes, to slip through gaps in their patrols like smoke. He felt the adrenaline surge, the primal focus that honed his senses, blurring the lines between hunter and hunted. He reached the central loading bay, a cavernous space illuminated by harsh industrial lights. Forklifts sat idle, and stacks of crates loomed like monolithic tombs. And then he saw him. Elias Vance, impeccably dressed as always, stood overseeing the unloading of a heavily reinforced container. He was surrounded by a phalanx of heavily armed bodyguards. Vance exuded an aura of cold authority, the undisputed king of his shadowy domain. As the container was being opened, revealing crates filled with what appeared to be military-grade assault rifles, Miles knew this was his moment. He signaled Marcus, who was positioned in a nearby control tower, ready to provide support and create diversions. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a series of blinding flashes. Marcus had activated a localized EMP device, temporarily disabling most of the active security systems and comms. Vance's guards, disoriented, fumbled with their weapons. It was the opening Miles needed. He burst into the loading bay, his rifle spitting fire. He moved with a brutal efficiency, taking down Vance's guards one by one. The air filled with the sharp staccato of gunfire and the guttural cries of the dying. Vance, his face contorted in rage and disbelief, scrambled for cover behind a stack of crates. "You can't stop this, Corbin," Vance roared, his voice echoing through the bay. "This is bigger than you, bigger than your dead brother." Miles ignored him, his focus solely on Vance. He advanced, his every movement precise, deliberate. He had confronted corrupt cops, navigated treacherous underworlds. But this was the culmination of his quest. Vance was the architect of so much pain, the man who had stolen his brother's life. He cornered Vance, the man's eyes wide with a fear Miles had never seen before. "It ends here, Vance," Miles growled, his voice raw with emotion. He raised his rifle, the sights perfectly aligned on his target. He saw the reflection of his own grim determination in Vance's terrified eyes. This was not justice in the eyes of the law. This was vengeance, pure and unadulterated. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a deafening explosion rocked the terminal. A secondary blast, far larger than the EMP, erupted from a nearby building. Miles instinctively shielded himself, the force of the blast throwing him backward. He was thrown against a stack of crates, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Dust and debris rained down. Sirens, real ones this time, began to wail in the distance, indicating a full-scale security response. Marcus's diversion had gone too far, or perhaps Vance had a contingency plan he hadn't anticipated. The operation had gone sideways. He struggled to his feet, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. Vance, capitalizing on the chaos, had disappeared into the smoke and confusion. The entire terminal was now under lockdown, a beacon of flashing lights and blaring alarms. Miles knew he had to escape. He had failed to eliminate his primary target, but he had crippled the operation and confirmed Vance's involvement. His mission was far from over. He had become a ghost, and now he had to vanish again. Amidst the deafening cacophony of alarms and the suffocating haze of smoke, Miles Corbin found himself in a desperate race against time. The secondary explosion, a calculated act of destruction or diversion by Vance's remaining forces, had turned his planned assassination into controlled chaos. Miles, thrown by the blast, scrambled to regain his bearings, the echo of Vance's taunt ringing in his ears. He couldn't allow Vance to escape, not now. He pushed through a cloud of acrid smoke, his senses on high alert. The terminal was swarming with armed guards, their confusion quickly turning into a coordinated lockdown. Miles knew he couldn't face them head-on. He needed to disappear, to vanish like the phantom he had become. He spotted Marcus Thorne in the control tower, a brief flash of movement amidst the flickering lights. Marcus had managed to escape the initial blast. "Marcus!" Miles yelled, his voice hoarse, straining against the din. "We need to exfiltrate, now!" Marcus, his face grimy and etched with grim resolve, gave a curt nod. He initiated a series of pre-programmed diversions, overloading secondary power systems and triggering fire suppression protocols in other sections of the terminal, drawing the guards' attention away from Miles's escape route. It was a risky gambit, but it bought Miles the precious seconds he needed. Miles sprinted towards a service exit he knew from his reconnaissance, dodging patrols and the debris that rained from the ceiling. He reached the blast doors, fumbling with the override panel. The metal groaned, resisting his frantic efforts. Just as a hail of gunfire erupted behind him, the doors hissed open, revealing the pre-dawn darkness outside. He burst out, the cool, clean air a welcome respite from the smoky interior. He ran towards his escape vehicle, a nondescript truck Marcus had pre-staged. As he reached it, he heard shouting, the harsh commands of guards closing in. He jumped into the driver's seat, Marcus already hot-wiring the ignition. "Vance!" "He slipped away," Miles panted, his voice filled with frustration. Marcus grunted, the engine roaring to life. "He's slippery, Miles, but we crippled his operation. Those arms? Gone. His entire setup, compromised. He'll be bleeding resources, and he knows we're coming for him." They sped away from the terminal, the sirens of approaching law enforcement growing louder behind them. A stark reminder that their actions, however justified, were still outside the law. The authorities would undoubtedly blame the cartel or some unknown terrorists. The truth, Miles knew, would remain buried, at least for now. He had failed to eliminate Vance, but he had struck a significant blow. Back in their safe house, Miles examined the evidence he had managed to collect before the blast. He still had some of Vance's documents, detailing shipments and transactions, but not the irrefutable proof he'd hoped for. The primary target had escaped, but the ramifications of their raid would ripple through Vance's empire. "He'll be wounded, but not defeated," Marcus stated, his eyes fixed on a news report detailing the terrorist attack at the cargo terminal. "He'll regroup, and he'll come for us. He won't let the man who embarrassed him live to tell the tale." Miles felt a grim acceptance settle over him. He had anticipated this. Vance was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. He knew his hunt was far from over. Vance would retaliate, and Miles had to be ready. "Then we strike first," Miles said, his voice a low growl. "We make him bleed. We expose him. We don't stop until he's destroyed." He looked at Marcus, a silent understanding passing between them. They were no longer just seeking justice. They were engaged in a war of attrition. He knew Vance would be looking for him, using his vast resources to hunt him down. The city of Seattle, once a temporary refuge, was now a battleground. The next move would be crucial. Miles, fueled by the memory of his brother and the thrill of the hunt, was ready. He knew that the ensuing confrontation would be brutal. and that only one of them would walk away. His pursuit of Vance had moved beyond investigation and into a brutal, unforgiving execution. The shadows were deepening, and the true fight had just begun. The days following the Tacoma terminal raid were a tense, clandestine dance. Miles Corbin and Marcus Thorne operated from the shadows of Seattle, their faces now plastered across a broad swath of law enforcement agencies' most wanted lists, branded as dangerous fugitives responsible for the violent incident. The official narrative, meticulously crafted by Thorne's remaining allies within the Port Angeles PD and amplified by Vance's influence, painted them as renegade officers driven by revenge, engaging in terrorist acts. It was a narrative Miles knew he had to dismantle, not with law enforcement, but with his own brand of truth. Elias Vance, wounded but not broken, was retaliating. Miles and Marcus spent their days intercepting encrypted communications, analyzing financial trails, and following Thorne's increasingly desperate attempts to track them. Thorne, it turned out, still had loyalists within the PAPD, men he had cultivated over years of corruption. These men were now working to feed false information, to misdirect Miles and Marcus, creating phantom leads and dead ends. "They're trying to funnel us into a trap," Marcus warned, his eyes glued to a complex network of intercepted data streams. "Thorne is playing his hand. He's sending us after ghosts. He thinks we're still playing by the book, looking for evidence, for arrests." Miles's gaze hardened. "He's wrong. We're not looking for arrests anymore, Marcus. We're looking for retribution. And Vance is still out there, rebuilding. We need to hit him where it truly hurts. Cripple his network, expose him, and make him feel the same fear he inflicted on my brother." Their focus shifted from direct confrontation to disruption and exposure. Marcus, with his deep understanding of intelligence warfare, began to exploit the cracks in Vance's empire. They targeted Vance's financial infrastructure, using stolen data to anonymously leak information about shell corporations and offshore accounts to international financial watchdogs. They sent encrypted packages of evidence, details of illicit shipments, names of complicit officials, evidence of money laundering, to investigative journalists in multiple countries, carefully timed to create a global wave of scrutiny. One evening, a critical piece of intelligence emerged. A former Blackwell Corporation executive, disillusioned and terrified after the Tacoma raid, contacted a secure channel Marcus maintained. The executive offered to provide detailed insider information on Vance's primary distribution hub within Seattle, a seemingly legitimate import-export company that served as a front for some of Vance's most sensitive operations. This hub was reportedly where Vance conducted his most confidential meetings and handled his most lucrative illicit deals. "This is it, Miles," Marcus said, his voice low and intense. "This is where we get him. Not with a raid, with precision. We find out when he's there, and we make sure he doesn't walk out." The information was detailed. The hub was located in an industrial zone near the Duwamish waterway, heavily secured but with a known vulnerability in its secondary loading docks. Vance was scheduled to be there within the next few days to oversee a critical transaction. Miles felt a chilling excitement, the hunter closing in on its prey. The memory of Ethan's questioning phone calls, his brother's desperate search for truth, now seemed to be leading him directly to the source of the corruption. "We go in," Miles said, his voice steady, devoid of hesitation. "We don't leave until Vance is dealt with. And this time, there are no diversions, no backup from a corrupt police force, just us and him." He knew this would likely be their final confrontation. Vance, aware he was being hunted, would be heavily guarded. The stakes had never been higher. He thought of Ethan, his brother's bright future extinguished by Vance's insatiable greed. The justice he sought would not be found in a courtroom, but in the silent, deadly precision of his own actions. Seattle, a city of endless possibilities, was about to become the stage for a brutal, personal reckoning. He was ready to finish what he had started, to bring his vengeance to Vance's doorstep, and ensure that no one else would ever suffer the same fate as Ethan. The industrial district bordering the Duwamish Waterway in Seattle was a testament to the city's relentless commercial drive. A maze of warehouses and shipping containers under the watchful gaze of sprawling cranes that clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. Miles Corbin and Marcus Thorne, clad in dark tactical gear, moved through the shadows like wraiths. Their objective? A seemingly innocuous import-export company, the heart of Elias Vance's Seattle operations. The air was thick with the scent of diesel fumes and salt, a gritty perfume of commerce and clandestine dealings. "He's inside," Marcus whispered, his voice crackling through their comms, a faint thermal signature blooming on his wrist-mounted display. "Vance is overseeing the shipment of something significant. Intel suggests it's the first of several shipments of new-model weaponry." Miles felt a surge of grim satisfaction. They weren't just closing in on Vance. They were dismantling his empire piece by lethal piece. Their infiltration was precise. Marcus's expertise in electronic warfare had created a temporary blind spot in the facility's external security, allowing Miles to slip through a less guarded access point. Once inside, the atmosphere shifted. The cavernous warehouse was bustling, but with an undercurrent of tension, of heavily armed guards positioned strategically, their gazes sharp and vigilant. This wasn't just a business operation. It was a fortress. Miles moved through the labyrinthine aisles of crates, the faint glow of his night vision goggles painting the scene in eerie greens. He moved with practiced silence, a predator in its element. He could hear Vance's distinctive silken voice echoing from a central office overlooking the loading bay, a chilling testament to his unwavering control. "The shipment must be expedited," Vance's voice boomed, laced with an uncharacteristic impatience. "No delays. These weapons are to begin their distribution by dawn, and make certain our associates are satisfied with the upgrade." Vance was discussing his illicit trade with a subordinate, the details of murder and destruction casually exchanged. Miles knew this was his opportunity. He signaled Marcus. "I'm going in," he mouthed, his eyes fixed on the reinforced door of Vance's office. Marcus gave a curt nod, preparing to create a diversion. As Miles made his move, an alarm blared sharp and piercing. A guard, his movement timed a fraction too late, had spotted Miles's shadow flitting between the crates. The warehouse erupted into a frenzy. Guards converged, their weapons spitting fire, the air filling with the sharp crack of automatic fire. Miles ignored the incoming barrage, his focus locked on Vance's office. He ducked behind a forklift, taking cover as bullets ricocheted off the metal. Marcus's diversion, smaller than anticipated due to the early alarm, sent a series of disorienting strobes and klaxon sounds through the facility, momentarily throwing the guards into disarray. Miles burst from cover, sprinting towards the office. He kicked open the reinforced door, his rifle trained. Vance, startled, spun around, a look of pure shock on his face. His henchman reacted instantly, opening fire on Miles. Miles returned fire with a brutal, efficient fury, his movements economical, deadly. He took down Vance's personal guards in rapid succession, the heavy thud of their bodies hitting the floor, a grim rhythm. Vance, cornered, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and fear, scrambled for a hidden panic button. Before Vance could activate it, Miles was upon him. He slammed Vance against a desk, years of pent-up grief and rage erupting. "Ethan wanted the truth, Vance," Miles roared, his voice raw. "You took that from him. You took everything." He felt a primal satisfaction in the raw power of his anger, the physical manifestation of his vengeance. He saw Vance's eyes darting around, searching for an escape, for a weapon. Vance, despite his fear, was still dangerous. Vance lunged, pulling a concealed blade. Miles reacted instinctively, parrying the strike and disarming him. The struggle was brutal, raw, visceral. Miles's training and sheer desperation, fueled by the memory of his brother, gave him the edge. Just as Miles gained the upper hand, ready to deliver the final blow, a massive explosion tore through the warehouse. It wasn't the controlled demolition Marcus had planned. This was a massive, concussive blast, originating from the main loading bay where the weapons shipment was being processed. It was a suicide bomber, a rogue element, perhaps Vance's final, desperate contingency. The force of the blast ripped through the office, throwing Miles and Vance across the room. Miles was slammed against a wall, his vision blurring, the world going white. He heard more screams, the collapse of metal and concrete. He tried to move, to find Vance, but his body wouldn't respond. He had managed to connect with Vance, to bring him to this point, but the finality of his vengeance was stolen, engulfed in the inferno. He had unleashed hell, but he couldn't control the flames. The world imploded around Miles Corbin in a deafening roar of fire and collapsing steel. The sheer force of the explosion at the weapons hub was immense, a brutal testament to the desperation of Elias Vance and the lengths to which those protecting his empire would go. Miles, thrown violently against the reinforced office wall, was momentarily paralyzed, his body screaming in protest. The acrid smell of burning metal and gunpowder filled his lungs, choking him. He was buried, trapped beneath tons of debris, the light from the raging fires above filtering down in an infernal glow. His first coherent thought wasn't of escape, but of Vance. Had Vance survived? Had Miles's intervention, however incomplete, prevented the shipment of those weapons? He strained to move, to push against the crushing weight above him, his muscles screaming in protest. His tactical vest offered little protection against this elemental fury, but the primal instinct to survive, to finish what he had started, pushed him onward. He felt a flicker of movement nearby. Marcus. His comms were dead, but he could sense Marcus's struggle, his desperate attempts to escape the collapsing structure. "Marcus," Miles rasped, his voice barely audible above the inferno. Are you there?" A muffled groan answered him. "Miles, I'm trapped. The north access, completely annihilated." Marcus's voice was weak, strained. "Vance, he's gone. The bomber. It was a contingency. He knew we were coming." Miles's heart sank. Vance, the architect of his brother's demise, the parasite that had infested so many lives, was lost in the inferno, or had escaped. A bittersweet victory, if it was one at all. He had disrupted the operation, but Vance, the ultimate target, remained elusive, swallowed by the chaos he himself had orchestrated. With Herculean effort, Miles managed to shift a section of concrete pinning his legs. He coughed, the dust and smoke burning his throat. He had to get out. He had to know what had become of Vance. He began to claw his way through the rubble, his senses heightened by the sheer will to survive. The flames licked closer, threatening to consume him. Meanwhile, Marcus, with a surge of adrenaline born of desperation, managed to free himself from a section of collapsed ceiling. He saw the inferno raging through the main warehouse, the heat intense. He knew Miles was still inside, somewhere. His mission had been to extract Miles, to ensure his survival. He couldn't abandon him. Navigating through the collapsing structure, Marcus found Miles, half buried but alive, struggling to break free. Together they worked to free each other, their movements hampered by the debris and the escalating destruction. The entire facility was a tinderbox, ready to explode again. "We need to get out, Miles," Marcus urged, his voice urgent. "The entire structure is compromised. It's going to be another blast soon." Miles, his body battered and bruised, his mind still grappling with the enormity of the destruction, finally managed to free himself fully. He looked back at the burning wreckage, the symbol of Vance's empire reduced to ashes. He had stopped the weapons shipment, crippled Vance's operations, and exposed his crimes to the world through the earlier leaks. But Elias Vance himself, the man responsible for Ethan's death, had slipped through his grasp once more. They navigated their way towards a less compromised section of the building, the sounds of approaching sirens growing louder, the lights of emergency vehicles painting the smoke plume with an ominous red glow. Their escape, once carefully planned, was now a desperate dash for survival. They were fugitives, branded and hunted, leaving behind a scene of devastation. As they emerged from the smoldering ruins, Miles Corbin looked back at the inferno, a mixture of grim satisfaction and lingering rage churning within him. He had brought down the Empire, but the king had escaped. The war wasn't over. It had merely shifted. He had faced down the corruption, he had fought the monsters, and he had survived. But the memory of Ethan, the unanswered questions, the lurking threat of Vance would continue to drive him. He was no longer just Detective Miles Corbin. He was a ghost, a hunter, forever bound to the shadows, forever seeking his brother's justice. The hunt would continue in the darkest corners of the world until Elias Vance finally paid the ultimate price. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story from us. We'll see you in the next one.